We often assume the world's most legendary tech empires are built on flawless 50-year master plans. We imagine a straight line from a brilliant idea to billions of dollars. But the reality of building something that lasts is usually a lot messier. When that linear plan shatters, it leaves behind a landscape of chaos. Take Steve Jobs. When he stood in front of Stanford University's graduating class, he didn't give them a roadmap to guaranteed success. Instead, he systematically dismantled his own mythos by sharing 3 stories of his life's biggest, most unplanned disasters. The first disaster happened when he was just a teenager. Jobs had enrolled in Reed College, a private, expensive school. He had absolutely no idea what he wanted to do with his life, yet he was rapidly draining the entire life savings of the working-class parents who had adopted him. After just 6 months, he made the terrifying decision to drop out completely. He severed his ties to a traditional, inherited path. It looked like a catastrophic failure at the time, but stepping off that conveyor belt was the only way to clear the space he needed to follow his own curiosity. The immediate reality of that choice was brutal. Without a dorm room, Jobs slept on the floor of his friends' rooms. He returned glass Coke bottles just to get the 5-cent deposits to buy food. And every Sunday night, he walked 7 miles across town to get one hot meal at the local Hare Krishna temple. But dropping out also meant he was no longer forced to take mandatory classes. He could sit in on whatever fascinated him, and what fascinated him was a calligraphy class. He took it purely out of artistic curiosity, with zero intention of ever applying it practically in his life. He spent his time studying the strict mechanics of beautiful typography. He learned the exact anatomical differences between serif and sans serif typefaces. He studied how variable spacing between different letter combinations changes the way text feels, and what makes great typography historically significant. For 10 years, none of this mattered. But then he was designing the first Macintosh computer. He took all of that useless knowledge and baked it directly into the machine. It became the first computer in the world with beautiful, proportionally spaced typography, a feature that Windows eventually copied, bringing it to every personal computer on Earth. Looking forward, the calligraphy class was a dead end. Looking backward, it was the DNA of the Macintosh. This realization became a cornerstone of Jobs' philosophy. Progress often feels like a series of disconnected accidents until the moment they finally intersect. By his 20s, Jobs had found something he loved doing. He and Steve Wozniak started Apple as a garage project, and over the next 10 years, they worked obsessively. They turned a 2-man operation into a $2 billion behemoth with over 4,000 employees. Then, at the exact moment he should have been celebrating the release of the Macintosh, it all unraveled. A bitter dispute over the company's future vision pitted Jobs against the executive he had hired to help run it. The board of directors sided with the executive. At age 30, Jobs was publicly fired from the company he created. The psychological weight of this was devastating. The singular focus of his entire adult life had just been completely erased. He was a highly visible Silicon Valley public failure. He briefly considered fleeing the tech industry altogether. But this absolute loss ended up being a forced extraction of his own ego. The paralyzing pressure to maintain his status disappeared, stripping away the heavy burden of being successful. Once the dust settled, he realized a core truth. He still deeply loved the actual work he was doing. Institutional rejection is brutal, but his internal passion remained completely intact. The heaviness of success was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. Having nothing to lose triggered a prolific creative rebirth. Over the next 5 years, he launched a new computer company called NeXT and an animation studio called Pixar. Then a strange irony occurred. Apple's own technology began to stagnate. In a move to save the company, they ended up buying NeXT, importing Jobs' new software architecture to save the exact same organization that had exiled him. Jobs' exile from Apple wasn't the end of his career. It was the start of his most creative era. By building NeXT and Pixar from nothing, he proved that his work didn't depend on a title or a boardroom's approval. He called the firing a bitter medicine, but one that eventually restored his focus to the work he actually loved.
At age 17, Jobs adopted a daily framework for prioritizing his life. He looked in the mirror every morning and asked, "If today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today?" At age 50, that philosophical exercise became a chilling reality. A routine morning scan revealed a very clear, undeniable tumor on his pancreas. The immediate prognosis was terrifying. His doctors told him the cancer was incurable and that he likely had between 3 and 6 months left. They gave him the explicit medical instruction to go home and get his affairs in order, which is the clinical code for preparing to die. A biopsy later that evening revealed a rare twist. The specific type of cancer he had was actually treatable with surgery. Physically, he survived the immediate threat, but psychologically, the impact of looking directly into the abyss of his own timeline was permanent. The presence of death is a defining filter. When you realize that your time is strictly limited, it strips away all external expectations. All pride, all fear of embarrassment, all social pressures simply fall away, leaving only the truth of what actually matters. Jobs viewed death as life's single greatest invention. It acts as a ruthless clearinghouse, removing the old and obsolete to make way for the new. Since every single one of us is already naked, and we are all headed toward the exact same unavoidable ending, there is zero rational reason not to follow your intuition. You have nothing left to protect. He left the Stanford graduates with a mantra that had guided his entire adult life. He traced it back to the back cover of a final issue of the Whole Earth catalog, printed back in 1971. Stay hungry, stay foolish. It's a command to actively reject the safety of the status quo. You have to maintain an insatiable appetite to do something great, and you have to embrace the absolute foolishness